Is there a national notion that this is Seattle's game?
Well, I mean, if you want to play up the disrespect card, I guess you could. I would point you to the awards show last night where Drake May finished second for MVP. The Seahawks didn't have a candidate. Mike Vrabel won Coach of the Year, and Josh McDaniels won Assistant Coach of the Year. I think they're getting plenty of credit for the job they've done. Now, if we're talking about it strictly from a talent perspective, I think most people feel like the Seahawks are more talented.
Sure.
And that's in part because they were more traditionally built. They were built over a few years and through high draft picks, where the Patriots were microwaved together. And we'll see how history remembers this Patriots team. You know, obviously part of it's going to be how they play on Sunday. But I'd argue, like, if you go back to 2001, and that was seen, and I remember thinking at the time, that's maybe the worst roster ever to win the Super Bowl. And you look back a few years later, and it really was a better team than we thought at the time, right? When you go down the list of players that were there, and that wound up being the foundation for two more Super Bowl champions, you know. So it is possible that this Patriots team looks a little different when we get a few years out from it, but there's no question that most people see the Seahawks as the more talented team. And I'd say, like, on the flip side, you know, a lot of people give the Patriots the coach and quarterback edge, which can be the equalizer.
Okay. Do you think that Darnold is like a flawed quarterback, and that out of the two quarterbacks, Darnold is the most likely to have the bad game?
I don't know about that. I think what we've seen from Darnold is 2 years of pretty consistent play. And a lot of people who've spent the last 2 years waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then when it did at the end of last year, pointing to that as evidence that he's still who he always was, even though it's like the only piece of evidence. You know what I mean? Like, it's the only thing. And here's my evidence that it may have changed. Go back to the first time that the Rams and Seahawks played, right? So the Seahawks won the last two. But the first time the Rams and Seahawks played, I believe Sam Darnold threw 4 interceptions. And he still brought them back at the end. And I'm bringing up that game because if Sam Darnold is who a lot of people in Boston think he is, then in that game he would have completely fallen apart and never bounced back. Yet he had all of those turnovers in that game and almost led them back to win the game at the very end. So, like, I think this narrative that he's going to crap himself or that you know, he doesn't have the ability to play on a big stage. I mean, based on what?
Right.
I mean, did you see the way he played against a pretty good Rams defense in the NFC title game? And I'm not saying he's perfect, but I think this idea that he is prone to, I mean, maybe he won't play well, but this idea that, like, oh yeah, like on a big stage he's going to fall apart. It didn't happen, you know, in the NFC playoffs. And I'd say the Seahawks played a better team in the championship game and maybe a better team in the divisional round than the Patriots played in any of their 3 playoff games.
And Bert, I think it's still people just trying to wrap their head around the fact that they're talking about a Super Bowl matchup that doesn't involve Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford, any of the people that you would expect to get there. And say, all right, well, they've already proven it, you know, on the highest level, or they've seen consistently them do it within regular seasons to know that they're not going to disappoint. For Sam Darnold, I would say, well, based on what? It's not so much based on what. It's, well, you're just basing it on this year and last year if you were paying attention, but most people weren't. You know, they just didn't think of Sam Darnold as one of those guys that they were going to have to worry about in February.
Yeah, and I think because I think there's like an acute sense of it in New England because of the ghosts thing where ESPN really screwed Sam on that one. Like,
I agree.
The Jets, I remember, were pissed about that, and I actually agreed with them that I mean, something that was said, like, kind of off the record. And, you know, he's like, oh, and if my understanding is the comment was basically like Bill makes you see ghosts out there. And then they go and someone says, I can't remember who it was, but someone said it on the broadcast while he was playing poorly, and it kind of got attached to him. And your memories of him are what happened in the division. And so, I don't know. It's just weird to me that you don't think that a guy can grow past that. I think we've seen so many examples of so many bad teams screwing up so many quarterbacks that it's almost illogical to think that a guy couldn't get a lot better if he got plugged into a better environment. And we used to see it a lot more than we do now. And I think you're right, Hardy. We've seen so many of the marquee games and so many of the marquee quarterback matchups. And Mahomes has been here every year, 5 or 6 years going into this one, that you've always had that guy there. And Jalen Hurts got here at a very young age. I think it's jarring for some people to see a guy later in his career do it. But, I mean, look, I think a lot of people had these questions about Joe Flacco going into the Super Bowl in 2012. A lot of people had these questions about Eli Manning going into the Super Bowl in 2007. We've seen guys overcome, early career problems and play really well on the biggest stage.
Bert, can the Patriots win this game if Darnold plays well and the Seattle Seahawks play well?
So it is actually interesting, Wallach. I talked to someone. I talked to a couple of Patriots people who watched the tape on Stafford playing against the Stafford playing against the Seahawks defense, and their response to that was, after watching that, I wouldn't blame anybody who voted Stafford for MVP. And I think it's sort of reflective of how well Drake has to play. I don't think Sam has to play as well as Drake has to play, based on what the two teams are. And I think Drake has to play really well for the Patriots to have a chance. I think if you look at the divisional round, the divisional round is proof that there are paths to win if Sam isn't carrying the team. Now, he played well in that game against the Niners. He's coming off the oblique injury. But if you look at it, he only threw for 127 yards. They ran for a zillion yards. They turned the ball over on defense. They scored on special teams. So I think that there's just a wider path for the Seahawks to win this game. And so Sam Darnold has to play well, but I don't think he needs to be the MVP of the game. Whereas I think Drake has to be a lot closer to that for the Patriots to have a chance.
Yeah, and I think that's still what's people are having a tough time wrapping their head around as they're getting ready to watch the Super Bowl. They don't want to think about the game in terms of, well, they only need to play well enough to win. They've seen too many instances recently. Going back to Tom Brady, it's well, that guy plays great, or played great in the Super Bowls that they won. Well, not always, but those are the ones that you remember. And, when you mentioned Eli Manning or you mentioned Joe Flacco, yeah, they played well for them, but they played well enough for their teams to win. Yeah. And that's something that I think people just in the anticipation of the Super Bowl, they don't want to resign themselves to the fact that either one of these guys, might just have to play well enough to win. For Drake it may be more than that. He needs to play better than he has played in the playoffs, but he doesn't need to have an all-time Super Bowl performance in order for the Patriots to win, because a lot of this has been about the defenses of both teams, and that's not what excites people leading up to the game.
Well, and you're not. I don't think people are as used to seeing it either. That's part of it. I think if you go back and look at the history of this, 20 years ago, if you had a good, not great quarterback, you had to be really, really good around that quarterback to win. The way the rules have changed football, the way the quarterbacks are coming out now, and I think it's the state of the position I think has gotten better over the years too. It's gone from, if you're just good at quarterback, you need to be really, really good around the quarterback, to now it's you almost have to be perfect around the quarterback. That's the way it's been, right? Well, what happened this year? This year, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs weren't as good, and then Mahomes got hurt. Joe Burrow got hurt. Lamar Jackson got hurt. Josh Allen and the Bills, they wound up in the divisional round losing on some weird stuff, and they scored 30 points even though they turned the ball over 5 times. So it's kind of a freak thing. You know how they lost that game. Mm-hmm. And so now you have two teams there, in the Super Bowl who didn't have to go through any of those 4 quarterbacks, who I think most people would agree were pretty clearly the best 4 quarterbacks in football going into the playoffs. So I think the equation changed this year. And that's no slight on the Seahawks or Patriots. You got to do what you got to do to get here. Just the reality of it. Like, how many times do you think over the next 5 years we're going to see 2 teams in the Super Bowl that didn't have to go through either of those guys to get here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are you confident? How do you think Mays played in the playoffs?
Or to win the game? To win the game. What?
Sure. How do you think Mays played in the playoffs so far?
So I would say what I would give Drake a lot of credit for is, and it's the same sort of thing I just talked about with Sam and how he played in that game where he threw 4 picks against the Rams. I think it's hard for a young quarterback when he doesn't have his A game to be able to come up with plays to win the game. And I think the best thing I can say about the way Drake's played in the playoffs is when he didn't have his A game, he was still making throws to win. And so, against Houston, it's a throw down the sideline to Booty. It's the short window throw to Diggs for the touchdown. Even though he didn't play great in that game and he got murdered by that Houston defensive line, he found a way to make the throws that he needed to make. And then against Denver, you had the throw on the was it the flea flicker to Hollins, right?
Yes.
Like where
up the sideline to his left.
And
yes.
that was a high leverage throw and a high leverage spot and in the conditions. And then he makes the play, and that was a great call by Josh McDaniels on the naked bootleg to win the game. So even though he wasn't at his very best, he was still able to summon the 3 or 4 or 5 plays he needed to win the game. Now, the difference now, I think, is that he's going to need more than those 3 or 4 or 5 plays, because I just don't think you're shutting down the Seahawks offense the way you did the Broncos offense with Jarrett Stidham, the Texans offense with C.J. Stroud, or the Chargers offense with basically no offensive line.
Okay, let's get to some injuries here. Let's start with Imamwari.
Nick Imamwari, yep.
All right.
There you go.
You were close enough as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
He got it. I think he got it.
Well, I needed John's help earlier. So, from what I'm hearing, he's integral to the performance of that defense. They play 5 defensive backs more than any other team. He's been a sensation. He could be defensive. I don't even know if did he win defensive rookie of the year? Was that
No,
thing
he's a
last time?
finalist for it.
Okay, they haven't decided that yet. For some reason, I guess they don't do
Carson
that.
Schlesinger was the rookie of the year.
Okay, so he did not win it. All right, so they did do it. All right, so but he was a finalist. Okay, so what are you hearing about his ankle? It's weird because there's just like a pool reporter at the practice, and there wasn't like a lot of information. It's not the pool reporter's fault. I mean, a lot of things to look at, and it's a low ankle sprain. He was out earlier this season with a high ankle sprain. He's going to play, but what are you hearing about that?
So, we talked to him yesterday, and he said that he went up for a ball in the middle of practice, came down with it, and just landed funny on his ankle and kind of rolled it. And so didn't feel good. And I think it, from what I understand, it sort of mirrors a tweak that he had in training camp. So is it worth monitoring? Yes. He was incredibly confident that he's going to play. He said he'd manage it accordingly. Now, is he going to lose practice reps over it? Maybe. Could it get aggravated in the game? Perhaps. He's a super important player for them, though. You're right about that, Fred. This is the same defensive scheme or similar defensive scheme to the Ravens scheme and to the Chargers scheme. And Nick Imamwari was drafted to play the role that Kyle Hamilton plays in Baltimore and the role that Derwin James plays with the Chargers. And basically the easiest way to put that is he's a player who, when you have him out there in the nickel and you have 5 defensive backs out there, normally you would see that sort of front, with 6 men in the defensive front, and you would say we're going to run at that. Imamwari can effectively both be a linebacker and a safety for you, even a nickel corner. So he kind of evens the numbers there, and it makes it harder for offenses to put to generate matchups, because the way you generate matchups is, all right, we're going to force them to go out there with 3 linebackers, and now we're going to throw in that linebacker. Well, if you don't need that third linebacker on the field to stop the run, and you can play with Eamon Warrior as a linebacker, now you can't find that matchup the same way you would be able to against other teams.
Okay, Drake May, these full practice, you're hearing that shoulder is what?
Fine. Yeah. I mean, there's wear and tear. And, I think back to Derek Carr in the offseason. And I remember when he retired and he had the surgery, I got calls from a few coaches who said that surgery is basically elective. And it was, the point they made was like, that's wear and tear that almost every quarterback has. And the reason I'm telling that story is because these guys go through normal wear and tear in their throwing shoulders that nobody knows about. And every quarterback deals with it. And so my understanding is he had the normal wear and tear, and then he landed on it. And so, there's some maintenance that has to take place when you do that. And they had the extra week to take care of it. So with the illness, he didn't practice the one day. And that gave him a rest day that maybe he wouldn't have had otherwise. And he was limited last week. But the fact that he's a full participant now tells you that he's going to be okay, because that's not something that you push in practice. If there's any issue with the throwing shoulder where you're worried about fatigue or fraying or anything like that, you aren't going to be pushing him on a Wednesday practice. So it's, a really good sign that he was a full participant the last couple of days.
All right, and Spillane, he's been practicing.
Yeah, and that one is a little bit more of I'd say that would be one I'd be a little worried that could get aggravated in the game. It sounds like he's full speed ahead and is going to play. What that looks like in the game, I think, is worth paying attention to, because from what I understand, that is one where, you get into the second quarter and your foot slips, and now all of a sudden, you're back to square one. So, not saying he won't make it through the game, but it's certainly something that could be aggravated, and I think it becomes a little bit of a wait and see thing for the Patriots, who've gotten really good play from Jack Gibbons behind him.
All right, and Harold Landry did not practice. Would you guess he's not playing in the game?
I think anything you get from him is a bonus at this point. It's not like he's been a major factor. This to me is like an older player who's probably breaking down a little bit, and you're now to your 21st game of the season, which is the most games anybody's ever played in the season. That mark of 21, which a few teams have reached now, I think, since they went to 17 games. It's a lot, and so I think, what you'll see from Landry, if you see him at all, is some spots where he's, coming in as a designated pass rusher, but probably not a whole lot else than that if you get that.
And speaking of the pass rush, who has the advantage there? Who do you think, which team will get more pressure on the quarterback?
I mean, I think the Seahawks have a more well-rounded defensive front. I think the advantage for both teams is on the interior, though, and I think that might actually wind up being the key to the game, where the Seahawks issue the last couple of years, I mean, going back to Pete Carroll's last year, has been the interior of the offensive line, and they did shore that up by going and getting Gray Zabel, who's been, a borderline All-Pro as a rookie. But you have Sundell at center, you have Bradford at the other guard spot. So there are matchups you can take advantage of if you're the Patriots with Milton Williams and Christian Barmore. And I think the same thing goes the other way, where they've got, the Seahawks do, probably two of the 10 best defensive tackles in football in Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy. And those guys can wreak havoc and cause problems for you. And it'll be interesting to see how, Onwenu, Bradbury, and the rookie Jared Wilson hold up against those guys.
If you like that clip, and how could you not? Check out more videos from Toucher and Hardy here. Point slightly up and to the left. For more Patriots analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. Point slightly down and to the left. And for the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 985thesportshub.com.